Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Simone Collins, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Director of Outreach for UHS Mental Health Services, and I'll be moderating our last session for today, Overcoming Imposter Phenomenon. Some of you have seen me a few times today already, so welcome back. For those of you joining us for the first time today, welcome to the inaugural Mental Health and Wellbeing Summit, where we're offering workshops and activities for students to take a break and take care of their mental and physical health. Before we continue, I would like to again invite us to take a moment to reflect on the land on which we currently reside. For those of us currently in Madison, we are guests on the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk Nation. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. I want to thank Professional Interpreting Enterprise for providing interpretation and captioning, and the Wisconsin Union Campus Event Services for producing this event. You can find the closed captioning button in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll also be using the Q&A function for this session. It is also located in your toolbar and will be open for any questions you may have for our presenters. Feel free to add them as the presentation goes on, and we'll come back to them at the end. I will now turn the space over to our presenters for this session, Joe and Stephanie.
Thank you, Simone. Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Stephanie Deneau. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a staff psychologist at University Health Services, and I'm excited to present with you all today on imposter phenomenon. I appreciate you all taking the time to join us and hope that you all have had a chance to enjoy some spring weather this weekend. I can turn it over to Joe to introduce herself and carry us through as we start our presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm Jo Hayes. I'm a licensed, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a licensed social worker and psychologist with Mental Health Services with a focus on partner and couple work. Thanks for joining us. And now I need to. So today we have several goals that we'd like to share with you. We want to spend some time recognizing characteristics in the role of an inner critic. We want to take a look at the range of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that contribute to inner critic and imposter phenomena. And we hope that by the end of our program today, you'll kind of at least be able to recognize 3 tools for helping to manage and work with imposter phenomena. So what does that inner critic voice have to say to you? That's that little voice in our head that kind of constantly criticizes and reminds us of different kinds of judgments and imperfections. It undermines our ability to interpret events. It can trigger negative moods and often sabotages our pursuit of satisfaction or meaning in life. One model of inner critic helps us to focus on its relationship to ensuring our survival by spotting danger in our environment and then regulating our emotional responses. It's considered part of our primitive survival brain and our brain stem. So our inner critic is very hypervigilant in helping us to kind of look out for threats. Psychology research has focused on the negativity bias kind of associated with this also brainstem functioning. And that means that biologically we tend to hear and maintain negative thoughts and feedback and information much louder and longer than we do neutral or positive comments. So that watch out, there's a snake is much more urgent for our brainstem than wow, you're doing a nice job. So the inner critic becomes responsible to help keeping us safe and comfortable, to motivate, and unfortunately to punish if they think it's going to be helpful for us to try to survive. So today you might have an inner critic that's kind of trying to motivate you to avoid other people in order to help you keep you from being hurt, or pushing you to do everything perfectly to avoid failure. Unfortunately, the intent is not always consistent with the outcome or the impact. Two types of inner critic self-talk are often shame-based, about the bad self, feeling flawed or inferior, incompetent. So that maybe thoughts like, don't make a fool of yourself, stay in the background, or I should have known better. And then often could be a weakness or fear and anxiety based, feeling dependent on others, mistrustful, isolated, abandoned. I'm better off on my own. Don't be vulnerable or you'll get hurt. So when the inner critic voice gets too loud, then we may find that we're making decisions that aren't in our own best interest. That can be times when others kind of start to demean or abuse us, and we kind of let that happen, or we allow it to continue. We get so focused on the needs or wants of others that we start to ignore our own needs. We can become embarrassed and uncomfortable with compliments and just some general feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, or helplessness. The inner critic is part of a mind that likes to problem solve and judge everything, but that also includes making judgments on ourselves. So when it goes into overdrive, it can seriously get in our way. So don't believe everything you think. We want to take a look at this work of the inner critic in a little bit more detail as we consider the imposter phenomena.
All right, thanks, Joe. I'm going to talk for a while on what is imposter phenomenon and ways to recognize it. So to start off, imposter phenomenon is an internal experience of intellectual and professional incapability despite objective evidence to the contrary. So essentially, it refers to an internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others actually perceive you to be. To put it simply, imposter phenomenon is the experience of feeling like a phony. You feel as though at any moment you're going to be found out as a fraud, like you don't belong where you are, and you only got there through dumb luck. A key part of this definition is that imposter phenomenon is an internal experience, which means it's comprised of thoughts, feelings, and assumptions about your sense of self, despite that objective evidence to the contrary. So while your actual performance might be solid, you might still be doubting your abilities or feeling not good enough. And then because you feel not good enough, we oftentimes can automatically believe that to be the truth. The second part of this slide says that this occurs when individuals maintain a strong belief that they are not intelligent. In fact, they're convinced that they have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise. So oftentimes people who struggle with this might seek external validation from other people a lot so that they can temporarily feel more confident in themselves. Yet typically this confidence doesn't last very long, and then they can often go back to having thoughts such as, oh, they're just saying this to me because they're my family member, or they're my friend, or wow, I really have them fooled. They think I'm smart, but that was just a fluke. I actually have no idea what I'm doing. So to take a look at this iceberg metaphor, at the top, this represents what people might think that success seems to come so easily. But there's this bottom part of the iceberg that represents all of these other things. These other people don't see underneath how much time, effort, dedication, discipline, sacrifice that you might be experiencing behind the scenes. And this creates anxiety because people with imposter syndrome feel the struggle to maintain this vision of what others see while feeling shameful of the extent to which they're really struggling. They might think, I'm keeping appearances up for now, but when are others going to find out the truth about me? So to go into this in a little bit more depth, imposter phenomenon is a collection of feelings and thoughts of inadequacy that persist even in the face of information indicating that the opposite is true. So again, feelings of inadequacy, there's still more that I should be doing. I still lack the fill in the blank quality that I need to succeed. And what's going to happen when everyone else finds out I'm actually lazy or not smart or not good enough? If we take a look at this cartoon, she's receiving positive feedback from lots of people, and her reaction is, eh. Then one person, it looks like, gives her negative feedback, and then she responds, it's true, oh my God, I'm a failure. So people with this imposter syndrome often selectively attune to negative feedback. The vast majority of external figures can provide positive feedback, but then there's this general dismissal that the positives don't matter as much, that it's the negative feedback that matters, even if it's less representative. And then it becomes a problem because that negative feedback then starts to form your conceptualization of yourself. And then finally, I wanted to note that this is common in undergraduate and graduate students, especially students with identities that are underrepresented. And I especially wanted to highlight that there's been research on comparing first generation and non-first generation college students. On college campuses, non-first generation students report a greater sense of belonging on average, lower levels of depression and stress compared with first generation students who had lower levels of sense of belonging and greater levels of depression and stress. So as a result, many first generation college students, many of which have underrepresented identities, feel more alone in their struggles, might have thoughts of others are more prepared, and hold a lot of self-doubt. They might hesitate to access resources on campus and may hesitate to share their concerns with family for fear of not being understood. Imposter phenomena is fueled by social media to a large extent. At its best, social media can be inspiring, but it can also lead to deeply unhelpful comparisons. You no longer have just the people in your line of sight to contend with. You risk comparing yourself to many others through social media that are not in your immediate physical space. So this becomes a problem when we compare ourselves to others who are where we would like to be. The problem is that it can easily make us feel inferior, and with social media, we can feel completely overwhelmed by the amount of comparisons that can be made. Comparisons that can make us feel like I'll never measure up. Why aren't I like this person? What's wrong with me that I'm not able to do all these things that this person seems to be doing? And that can fuel further anxiety and depression. Everyone tends to hide the efforts but reveal the achievements, which it can present a distorted vision of reality. People present themselves as a brand and not as much that reality. And then when we only showcase our best moments, it can give the impression that our lives are better than they actually are. There's a quote by, I believe it's Jordan Peterson, who said, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. So I think that that's very relevant here of how social media can lend itself to focusing on our deficiencies instead of our strengths. Where do we find imposter phenomena? It's very common for it to come up when we encounter new situations or challenges. It's not uncommon for people to experience this coming into college, perhaps their high school experience. They felt much more confident. They felt like I can handle this. And getting into college, that self-doubt creeps in. This chart kind of presents that essentially this idea that everyone is susceptible to imposter syndrome, that an estimated 70% of people experience it at some point in their life. That's pretty astounding. That 1.7 million female students in post-baccalaureate degree programs in 2015 experienced this. 80% of CEOs and 82% of managing directors report feeling out of their depth. And graduate students especially could be particularly challenging. So essentially, we want to highlight that you are not alone in experiencing this, that while there are populations of folks that are more likely to experience this, any individual in any position is susceptible. And I think that it's important because of this to challenge this thought, oh, well, you know, because they're in this higher position, they must have it all figured out, right? You might have this thought that because they have seemingly succeeded, that they have it all figured out. And they may not feel that way, that these thoughts are quite common to have kind of in any position that we might hold. What do imposter thoughts look like? So you'll see on the left-hand side, a little bubble within a larger bubble. And so the little bubble is what I know, and then the much larger bubble is what I think other people know. So oftentimes we can have an assumption that other people know more than me. I only know this, everyone else seems to be much more prepared. When we think this though, that's often a gross over-exaggeration. In reality, what you actually know and what others actually know are much more similar in size. While there certainly can be some variation, the reality of any differences in knowledge is most often not the extreme overgeneralization that we make in our minds. So on the right-hand side, this represents much more of what happens in reality, that what you know is quite similar to what others know. I wanted to note before we move on that imposter syndrome can sometimes fuel feelings of motivation, that there are some times in which, oh, because I think other people know more, you know, that really motivates me. I want to get to that point. Yet this usually comes at a cost in the form of constant anxiety. You might start over preparing or work much harder than is actually necessary to make sure that no one finds out that you're a fraud. So imposter thoughts might give you this urge to feel like you need to work or prepare more than what's necessary. So this cartoon on the left-hand side shows someone providing feedback. I love your work. And this person saying, oh, they're my family. They have to say that. Next person says, I love your work. And you say, they're my friends. They have to say that. And then the next person says, I love your work. Oh, they're complete strangers. They have to say that. So this kind of goes to show that there's no limit on how far imposter syndrome will go to make you feel like you and your own abilities are not the cause of your own success. It can be difficult to allow yourself permission to accept positive feedback as valid from others. Sometimes this could be because of the fear of becoming complacent. Well, I don't want to believe this positive feedback too much because I don't want to lose motivation, or I don't want to lose the sense of discipline. The other cartoon reads, I'm not a natural at sales. Do I belong here? Well, she's just being nice. I'm not that good. And this is pure luck. Someone else deserves this spot. This is oftentimes based on feeling and often involves missing feedback from other people that do indicate that they are actually more accepting of you. If you truly believe that someone else deserves that spot, this can fall down a spiral. This means that, oh, well, I didn't do enough, or maybe I'm not good enough to deserve the spot that I have, which then kind of facilitates this perpetual cycle of focusing on, ooh, what did I do wrong? And then if you're constantly worrying about doing something wrong or making a mistake in the position that you're in, that just further fuels anxiety. If any of this so far is resonating with anyone here, I would say that you're on your way to recognizing imposter syndrome. So just taking a moment to talk about emotions that go along with this as well. So this cartoon, someone asks, "How are you doing?" And this person says, "I'm doing just fine." When really he's having lots of thoughts such as like, "You suck, you're a failure, stop trying, just stop, and you don't know what you're doing." So what goes along with this imposter phenomenon is sometimes a pressure to put on a front and say, "I'm doing well," or "I'm doing just fine." There can be a fear of acknowledging all of these self-doubting thoughts, fear of having that be seen as a sign of weakness, or maybe this fear of, "Ooh, then they'll really know that I'm not cut out for this." And sometimes it can be difficult to keep consistently putting on a front. And then sometimes that can lead to feeling anxious in social situations and then lead to avoidance. Another way that this might play out is you might be in a conversation with someone and feel as though, ooh, they're going to discover that I'm incompetent. You might be delivering a presentation and feel as though you just need to get through it before anyone realizes that you really don't belong there. In general, this can lead to kind of constant suppression and bottling up of imposter phenomenon. Like, I need to tell others that I'm fine, and then maybe I'll start to believe it too, but oftentimes these thoughts just keep resurfacing. So these characteristics, many I've already talked about: feeling like a fraud or an imposter, attributing your success to luck or chance, denying competence, and discounting praise from other people. One that I haven't talked about as much yet is a characteristic is a need to be special or a need to be the very best. We know that certain factors can contribute to the more general experience of imposter syndrome. For example, you might have come from a family that highly valued achievement, or perhaps you somehow fell into a role of being known as the smart one. So sometimes imposter syndrome thoughts can come up if this identity feels threatened in a new environment. "Oh no, I'm out of my league here. I can't risk not being the best. I've never not been seen as the best at something before." Or perhaps you've had parents who have flipped back and forth between offering praise and then being critical. So that can sometimes lead to this pressure to, I need to keep trying and keep working so that I can guarantee praise. The other piece of this that I wanted to point out is that a characteristic can be fear of and guilt of success. So there can be this overwhelming feeling that you don't deserve success or feel guilty that you're there. These are some common stressful thinking styles that often go along with imposter phenomenon. Perhaps some of these might seem familiar. Black and white thinking is also known as all or nothing type thinking, and that is the tendency to think in extremes. An example being, I am a brilliant success or I am an utter failure. There's no in between. This is considered a thought distortion because it keeps us from seeing the world as it often is: complex, more nuanced, and full of all the shades in between. With imposter phenomenon, this type of thinking is either I'm competent or I'm not. I either fall into this box or that box, and if I fall into the incompetent box, then I'm not good enough. A way to recognize this type of thinking is to check to see if any of your thoughts contain words like always or never. Like, I will always be behind, or I'll never be good enough, or I'll never get over this imposter syndrome. This type of thinking is anxiety provoking because it leaves no middle ground. With perfectionism, people who experience imposter phenomenon can often be perfectionistic. Unhealthy perfectionism can lead to having unrealistic expectations that can't be met, as well as a constant fear of failure. This focus on doing everything perfectly can also lead to procrastination due to the worry of not meeting these expectations, or a struggle to ever stop working on something that's already good enough, then more work can pile up. Long-term planning. To a certain extent, of course, long-term planning can be helpful. It can be helpful to have some idea of what type of job or what type of environment we might enjoy working in. But long-term planning can be unhelpful if you notice a lack of flexibility in your future planning. Perhaps if you think it has to be this, or there are no other options, or if I can't do this, then I have nothing, or I'm a failure. Also, if it feels like most of your mindset is future oriented, like if you're always focused on things that you need to do instead of living more in the moment. Being in the present moment can actually inform our future planning because we learn to tune in more to how we feel about what we're doing, as opposed to getting hooked into future planning just for the sake of having certainty. Replaying the past is the opposite of long-term planning. Thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done this, or maybe if I would have done things differently, things would be better. Again, this can be helpful to an extent to learn from mistakes, but unhelpful if you're not allowing yourself permission to move forward. If noticing this type of thinking, it might be helpful to give yourself permission to make mistakes, or to question whether your own mind is assuming that perhaps you messed up more than what actually happened in reality. Catastrophizing is essentially assuming that the worst will happen. If we react to situations based on a belief that the worst case scenario will happen, yes, to a certain extent, we might be protecting ourselves, yet we'd also be omitting consideration of other more likely perspectives and scenarios that might play out. And lastly, disqualifying the positives. Essentially, that's, for some reason, good things don't count because, oh, that was just an easy task, or attributed to chance, or even that's just a mistake that worked out, and that bad things are more deeply internalized as personal flaws. Most of this I've already gone over, that ways to recognize imposter phenomenon in the moment. Again, fearing failure and success, dwelling on the negative, and having these perfectionism, avoidance, and procrastination tendencies. So more of what does this look like in action? A lot of this I've already covered, but just to especially highlight from The Secret Thoughts of a Successful Woman by Valerie Young, she wrote about 5 different sort of archetypes of someone coping with imposter syndrome. One is the perfectionist. So someone who's a perfectionist has their primary focus on how something is done, and even one minor flaw in an otherwise stellar performance is not enough. The superwoman or the superman is someone who feels like they're falling short in any role, as a student, as a partner, in the home or at work. All evoke shame because these people feel that they should be able to handle it all perfectly and easily. The genius. This type of individual believes that competence is measured in terms of ease and speed. So struggling to master a subject or skill or not succeeding on the first try can feel like a failure. The soloist. The soloist is someone who feels like it needs to be them alone that completes a task, and that needing help is a sign of defeat. And the expert. This is the knowledge version of the perfectionist. The expert expects to know everything, and that even a minor lack of knowledge can feel like a failure. A little bit more information on imposter syndrome in action. So there's been some research on first-generation undergraduates in competitive STEM courses. And students who perceived their STEM class to be highly competitive tended to experience greater feelings of being an imposter. Participants who agreed with statements such as students tend to be very competitive with each other in this class also tended to agree with statements such as in class, I felt like people might find out that I'm not as capable as they think I am. And this was especially pronounced for first generation university students. There's also research on employees and imposter syndrome. And so employees who struggle with imposter syndrome might feel like they think their colleagues and supervisors overestimate them. They might sabotage themselves. They have an immense fear of failure, but at the same time, they can be terrified of success. They want to prove their worth, but worry that they don't deserve high levels of success. And they can also be less likely to ask for a raise. Since they don't see themselves as competent, they don't think they're worth more money. They continuously minimize their contributions. So I've been spending a lot of time talking about the downsides of imposter phenomenon. And I wanted to make a point to say that if any of this is resonating with folks, that those who struggle with imposter phenomenon also have many strengths. They are more likely to try to improve themselves. They're more likely to be liked by their peers and coworkers. They're less likely to indulge in risky behaviors and more likely to work harder. Also, the good news is that people who are like real frauds don't normally feel this way. So if you're experiencing imposter syndrome, it's because it's likely that you have strong values of mastery, integrity, and excellence. There's a quote by Tanya Geisler, who's a certified leadership coach and helping people overcome imposter complex. And she says that self-doubt is proof of your humanity, not your inadequacy.
So we want to switch a little bit and now take a look at when I recognize imposter phenomena for myself and others, what kinds of ways can I manage that or work with that? The first thing that comes to mind in these, anyway, is to kind of recognize it and to name it, that you want to be able to acknowledge that, ooh, I'm kind of getting sucked into this negative frame of mind. And then we'll talk about some ways that to kind of counteract that. But it's useful to kind of predict that this is going to happen, particularly when we're juggling a lot of things in life, that there's a lot of transition going on or a lot of uncertainty. It's likely that doubt or wondering about how you might be able to do more or what the future is going to look like is going to pop up. And that's going to impact that kind of negative critical voice that's inside of you. So you want to be able to recognize it and to acknowledge it. In the cartoon on the right, Dr. Adams is being introduced as an expert in imposter syndrome. And then Dr. Adams responds, aha, don't be silly. There's lots of scholars who have made more significant. And then she's like, oh my gosh, and recognizes that she's falling back into imposter syndrome. You want to validate that this is going to pop up, to recognize, yep, this happens to lots of people, and maybe to consider that when this pops up, this is a message to myself that I'm juggling a lot of things. There's a lot of kind of change going on in my life, and this is a message to me that maybe I want to be more intentional about my self-care and take a look at how I'm just being a healthy person. So one of the ways of dealing with imposter phenomenon, once you notice that these messages are coming in, is to kind of develop some affirmations that we want to reframe and rewire the negative messages that are going on in our head and in our self-evaluation. One tool to do that is to take a look at minimizing the qualifiers that are there. So if I'm thinking, even when I'm being positive, I might be saying, hopefully I'll master this tomorrow. We want to think about, okay, we have this qualifier, this hopefully kind of there. What if I just say, I'll master this or I'm by tomorrow is there. I might say, I'm usually a good daughter. I'm usually a good friend. And it's like, what if I just take out that usually and just say, I'm a good daughter. I'm a good friend. These are much stronger statements, and they're associated with a much more anchoring sense of wholeness and wellness inside of people. Um, Stephanie talked about this a little bit of kind of looking at that never and always kind of language that we use with ourselves. I'll never get started. And in this case, we want to do what can we do? What will we do? I'll get started and leave out the word that's there. The one tool is to take a look at focusing on what you can or will do. And this is in direct response to rather than saying the absence of a negative. I don't want to procrastinate on this, or I'm not going to procrastinate on this, because that's still firing different neurons in our head that are associated with words like procrastinate or worry. So if I think to myself, okay, if I'm not procrastinating, then what am I doing? And you want to focus on what that intention would be. In this case, an example might be, I'm going to write 100 words. I'm going to write for 5 minutes. If I say stop worrying, okay, if I'm not worrying, if I think to myself, if I'm not worrying, what would I be doing? Could I be engaged in? And in this case, I might say to myself, okay, the next step is I want to open Canvas and I want to read what the assignment is. It's helpful not to make these very specific and very finite. So rather than even saying, I'm not going to worry, I'm going to do the assignment or I'm going to finish the assignment, I can even break it down to a more basic place of where I want to start. I just need to open up and I need to read the assignment and to get started. This is like learning a new language. So part of it is to also be patient with yourself and expect that, saying I'm a good daughter may not resonate. It may not be easy to say like, yes, this is absolutely true. And part of that is that perfectionistic thing that can kind of get in the way. But that it's going to feel unnatural. Chances are you spent several or multiple years into this. I'm going to criticize for everything that's not perfect as a way to motivate me, as a way to try to kind of get a grip on the concept of success. And so it's after several years of that language, it's going to take a little while for the new voice to kind of feel natural and intuitive. So be patient with yourself and expect it's going to kind of feel a little bit odd coming out of your mouth when you first start to work with it. So we want to look at some other examples just to kind of like, hopefully as we go through some examples, get something that's like, oh yeah, that sounds like something that would fit the way I think about the world or I think about life. That would be helpful for me to maybe practice or kind of play around with. So if I have the thought I might not be able to answer that question, then you want to have this conversation with yourself. It's like, that's okay. No one expects you to know everything. It's a learning opportunity. I'll share what I can. Sometimes it's helpful to think about what would I say to a best friend or to a younger sibling or a favorite nephew. It's like I wouldn't say to them, you're an idiot. So how can I think about how I might respond to them and then kind of reflect on that I can also say those kinds of comments or those kinds of ways of looking at it to myself. Another example, I have only an elementary understanding. And it's like, okay, let's take a breath, let's slow down and say, that's okay. I don't need to make it complicated. It doesn't need to be complicated, especially at the beginning. You need to start somewhere and then you'll be able to move, or I'll be able to move forward. So you want to identify a positive affirmation or positive reframe to kind of help counterbalance or combat the statements of self-doubt. So you're writing a kind of new script to how you're engaging in different kinds of complex or challenging situations. It can be helpful to literally write it down and to read it across the day to kind of anchor it, just like we would learn a new language. We start out with a couple key phrases and we kind of repeat those, we kind of practice those, and ultimately they can come more spontaneously out of our brain and out of our mouths when we're talking. So some other ways to look at an imposter might think, I can't present in lab. I don't know what I'm doing. And the non-imposter would think about, okay, everybody feels off base when they start something new. I'm going to formulate some questions to get started. An imposter feeling might be, my GPA sucks, I can't do this. And a non-imposter approach would focus more on, I need to consider a new strategy here. What am I missing? What can I do differently? A challenging thought might be, I'll never get this funding, so what's the point of applying? And then when I take a moment and think about, okay, how can I think about what I can do and how I can move forward? I have some ideas, and going through the process of applying can actually help me formulate some additional ideas and solidify the ones that I have. Again, we want to continue to challenge sabotaging thoughts. Example on the left, these are not the results I was expecting. It's all useless. And then we want to first name it and recognize it, kind of, whoa, I recognize it. And how am I going to reframe this? It's a start, and I'm going to need to play around with it some more in order to move forward. The spontaneous thought comes up, I can't meet with my advisor. I have no idea where to start on this project. Okay, okay, I want to recognize, I want to name it. This is that imposter phenomenon popping up again. And then you want to work on the reframe. I'll ask if we can brainstorm ideas and for some references to get started. Continuing challenging sabotaging thoughts, diffusion is another tool that people use to deal with some of the impact of the negative thought when we have it, or the critical voice that's there. And this involves using language to kind of distance and disconnect and look at the thoughts kind of more externally, and the passing sensations and emotions that are attached to them. So if I have the thought, I'm such an idiot, the first step back and distancing might be, I'm having the thought that I'm an idiot. And then I can take another step and add on, I'm noticing I'm having the thought that I'm an idiot. Or my inner critic is suggesting that I'm an idiot. So the idea of recognizing, you want to name it, that, yep, this is it. And now how do I begin to distance myself from it? Another question that often kind of comes up that feels overwhelming is what if, all those things, again, projecting into the future and kind of getting caught in a realm of thoughts just kind of starts rolling and feels like it gets out of control. And we're too much in the future and unable to kind of do the things that I need to do now in order to make progress towards what that future concern is. So what if I don't have a job in May? What if I don't have a job this summer? And you want to think about the what's if and recognize, okay, this is getting me in a space and putting me in an energy that's not being helpful, and there's nothing I can do about it. So to acknowledge, I don't know what I'll do in May, but I don't have to answer that question today. So you want to give yourself the credit you deserve. And I like this Shonda Rhimes quote, I am not lucky. You know what I am? I'm smart. I'm talented. I take advantage of the opportunities that come my way, and I work really, really hard. So to be thinking about, I take advantage of opportunities, or I can take advantage. I'm working really, really hard. I am talented. And again, I want to go back to the idea that a new language, and so it needs to be practiced. It needs to be rehearsed if you're going to get the skill that you need when a really tough event or a tough bout of imposter syndrome comes up. You don't get up one morning and say, I'm going to run a marathon. I don't get up and say, I'm going to press 300 pounds. You work at small increments so that you build up stamina, and you work on continuing to develop the skill so that it becomes more intuitive. And this kind of new language of supporting yourself works the same way. Luckily, most of us have a sense of how we apply that to other people. So it's not that we're unfamiliar with the language, what we're unfamiliar with is applying it to ourselves. So some people will decide that I have a phrase for the week, which it might be, I've got this, or I'm ready to go. And so if they're moving from point A to point B, they may take that and just say, okay, this is every step that I take, it's going to be kind of rhythmic. I've got this, I'm ready to go. I've got this, I'm ready to go, as they're walking down the street. Some people put it as a screensaver. Some people put a Post-it note on their screen or maybe on the bulletin board behind that just kind of reminds them, okay, this is a way I want to be thinking about where I am and what I'm doing in a kind of proactive, reframed way. A lot of people put up a pop-up reminder message on their phone. So as they're scrolling through their phone, there's a reminder like, you got this, girl, kind of thing. And just kind of to reinforce that idea so that the language of being self-affirming becomes more familiar. So some other things to kind of think about, and I'm sure that some of these have been things that you've all today and last night as well were talked about. If you want to have a way to kind of track your accomplishments, you have an intuitive sense in imposter syndrome of coming up with all the things that weren't perfect. But of the 80% of the things that are going well, they're just not on our radar. We're just not attending to them. So you want to think about, if I think across the back, over the last day or so, it's like, when did I feel good? When did I feel anchored? When did I feel like I was connected? Sometimes I ask myself, like, when did I laugh out loud? Because I want to remember those times. I want to be aware of some of the factors that contribute to that, because I want that to happen more often. Let's see. Often, I think Dr. Joy talked about journaling is important for her, and I think this is a way that journaling can also be a way that we translate the kind of what's going on our head and kind of articulate and be able to look at it. And then we can also go back and review it. You want to find or create a support system. These are people who you can reach out to, and they may be peers, friends, significant others, or maybe mentors professionally or academically. Role models that you've been able to identify. And these are people, people can be really important in our lives, but they may not necessarily be good folks to support us when we're in this kind of self-critical moment. Some people kind of energize us, and some people are more likely to kind of use our energy or take away our energy. So you want to be strategic. If you're really feeling imperfect, if you're really feeling self-doubting, that there are going to be certain people you want to have identified as part of this bubble for you that you can go to, and to know that they're going to be able to either share that space with you, to be able to help you to reframe that and kind of help you to get back on track in terms of being in the moment and also being affirming of yourself. Visualize success. On the right-hand side, there's a picture of a duckling kind of shaking water off its back. And this comes from somebody shared with me that they had felt overwhelmed by just getting lots of critical comments on some writing thesis that they were working on. And they needed to remind themselves, I just need to kind of center in myself and shake all of this off, like the water off my back. And so they posted this picture to just kind of remind them of also that kind of younger and freer self, before lots of deadlines and lots of expectations were there. But also, I just need to shake it off, and I just need to move forward. And I also included the image because a couple of weeks later, another student was talking to me about how they had been out looking at the ducks on the lake, and they're kind of like diving in through the waves, and the waves are just kind of gently flowing, and the sun was out, and it was just like, why isn't my life this simple? Why can't I just be, the flowing like the duck that's there? And they shared that with one of their family members, and they said, come on, that little duck's feet are just working really, really fast under the water to help it kind of do all those things. So it looks like it's free and easy, but they're expending a lot of energy. They're working really hard in order to do that. And it's just like, yeah, okay, I need to get back to that idea of, it doesn't always look on the outside, it doesn't always look for other folks as well as other folks watching me, that the flow of what's happening isn't always as simple or straightforward or easy or successful as sometimes it's there. And yeah, it's okay. If I want to enjoy life, I can get my little feet going pretty fast, was kind of how she integrated that into her thinking. Owning your own successes and practice just saying thank you without qualifiers. So when somebody says, wow, you did a really good job, or I really enjoyed that, to say thank you. Yeah, it was kind of fun. Or yeah, I worked hard, but yeah, it worked out well. As opposed to often people say, thank you, I could have done better, or I felt like, I worked on it at the last minute or something like that. That just the idea of I need to be able to just say thank you, to acknowledge and accept, and hopefully begin to celebrate in the recognition that I gave somebody a good experience. And again, we've already talked about, you need to know that you're in good company. If you Google imposter syndrome, there's lots of stories that'll come up of lots of famous people who have come out and kind of talked about that inner doubt that pops up periodically. And they're waiting for somebody to find out or take away their Emmy or whatever that's there. So if you have a chance, take a look at that. We talked a little bit about comparisons already too. Part of the way of not only just comparing yourself to others, a tool for this is also to help and be a mentor and support for other people in your environment, whether it's peers or family members or whatever. That as we help others own and share and celebrate their accomplishments, this also reminds us and gives us an idea of how we can kind of do that for ourselves. We want to be able to challenge and support others to kind of go out of their comfort zone. So if somebody's wondering if they should, send in a proposal for a conference presentation kind of thing, go ahead and kind of encourage them to, yeah, if they get it, it's great. If they don't, it was still an opportunity to try something new and experiment with some things. Stop seeking perfection. We've talked a little bit about this already, and again, that's a really huge topic. TED Talks has a playlist of things of their programs on how perfectionist fails us. I think there's 4 in that. So if it's something you'd like to learn some more about, I encourage you to take a look at those YouTube TED Talks. And this is a quote: "The world we live in is I'll try it again. The world we live in is the result of a lot of brave people trying and failing, and only succeeding once in a while. You're not an imposter for trying something that might not work. You're a hero." And this comes from Valerie Young. "If you want to stop feeling like an imposter, you have to stop thinking like one." And she gives several examples that non-imposters walk into a new situation and feel like, "I've got this." Not because they're arrogant, but because they understand that it's okay to rely on curiosity when you're in the middle of a learning curve and doing something new. Another is non-imposters can be scared and accept that fear is a normal response when things are unknown. Non-imposters know that it is entirely possible to not know the answer, that it's okay to ask for help, and it's reasonable that mistakes will be made, and there doesn't have to be shame attached to that. So some resilience of emotion tools. Recall connections with people from your support circle of support. Often students talk about, like, I feel like I call home too much. I kind of relying on my family members or my friends or my partner too much, and I want to feel more self-reliant. And so one of the intermediate steps that we work with is to say, so if you can go into your what I call your mind's eye, and just kind of think about and remember a conversation that you had with one of these people, whether it was a phone or a texting series that went on. And we have a memory of this in our brain and also often in our body, that we can kind of, like, it may be that you visualize the person, but you can hear their voice as they're sharing with you their affirmations, their support, what kinds of things would they say? They may acknowledge, yeah, sounds like you're having a really tough time now. I know you can be resilient. I know you've got some clever ideas, or you shared this with me, kind of thing that's there. So even when there's times when we can't be right now talking to that person, an intermediate step or another way is to kind of go in our mind's eye and hear that voice or hear that phrasing and feel that feeling in our body. This is also one of the things, just like we were doing with language, of how do you move to intermediate steps, is that if we're remembering it and pulling it out of our own brain, we're that much closer to being able to actually say the things to ourselves directly. So we want to move in small increments of change, because you've had a lot of experience, or most of us have had lots of experience kind of being in this space. And we want to kind of move towards being able to affirm ourselves in the way that we affirm other people who are important to us. And I think we've talked a little bit about gratitude moments too. Recall something that made you feel good this week, and just kind of like, oh yeah, I can be in this moment and kind of connect with that. So I want to take a moment now. Another way is to focus on your breathing. So take a moment as we're getting to the end of the day on Friday. Put your hand on your heart. And in this case, you want to kind of model your breathing to the animation that's on the screen. You want to breathe in as it goes up, and then slowly exhale as it collapses. We're just going to stay with this a couple more times. And then exhale. Breathe in and exhale. Thank you. Another component that we like to think about is grounding. When my head or my mind, my body is feeling in chaos, one of the ways is to come back to the here and now in a very concrete way. And often we focus on the senses to be able to do that. Because we want to shut off all that replaying of the past. We want to get out of projecting into the future. So it's we want to calm the racing thoughts. And the research shows that it takes about 2 minutes of distracting yourself to interrupt when you're kind of coming out of an obsessive moment that's there. So you want to be patient with yourself. And 2 minutes can seem like a long time sometimes, especially if we're trying to calm a lot of intensity. So it's important to be patient. In the chart on the right-hand side, it shows some examples of just kind of being tuned into your body. Pressing your toes and grounding yourself on the floor is often a way that we talk about. I don't know where you are, but I spend a lot of time sitting looking at a screen rather than standing up. So what I found is I focus on my toes. And what I want to do is find a way that I can recognize each of my individual toes. Usually I just do one foot because I don't need the time to spend both feet. And I may need to wiggle them. I may need to try to, kind of pull them apart. I may compress them so I can feel it. But it just, for me, and I'm not saying this is a big universal thing, but you want to explore kinds of how you connect with, often with our body, with the room or space that we're in a sensory way, to just get you so focused on something very finite that it helps interrupt the cycle of just the chaotic thinking that's going on, or the chaotic feeling that's in your body. So another one is looking at your five senses. Often I hear a lot of people talking about just using that cup of tea. It may be the process of making the tea is soothing. It may be the warmth of holding it or the coldness, depending on what kind of tea it is. It may be the aromatic sense of the tea or the actual taste of the tea that's there. Self-soothing can be taking a shower or a bath. Some people like to do something like lighting a candle or some kind of aromatic factor. Observing details in the environment that you're in, going out for a walk and noticing how the shadows are different. Right now, it's an interesting time to start to notice where the little green spaces are. Even though a couple days ago, I'm still watching to see how much of the snow melted. At this point, there's not much snow left when I'm outside. Breathing, we just did a little bit of breathing kind of to parallel to the image that's there. There's lots of ways to breathe if you Google that. And just finding any way to distract yourself. Some people count, some people look for different colors in the environment. There's lots of different ways to do it, and you can experiment with some things and see what resonates with you and is most effective to help you. Other ways to centering your senses. If you want to kind of take a look at how the texture of your clothing is different, running your seam along your jeans, playing with a button, and just kind of feeling the sense of that, the smoothness of the roughness of that. Often people have funny videos on YouTube that they like to go to, and they have some places that they already program, whether it's, watching funny babies laughing or miniature ponies running around that kind of go to. Often we're working with a lot of antibacterial gels or lotions right now, or washing our hands. And that can be a time when you just anchor on, sometimes if you're counting to make sure you're doing your 20 seconds that are there, but is there a fragrance to it? Does it feel warm or cool? Is it sticky or stingy? Is it thick? That's there, that's a time that you can use that sensory to just kind of ground and focus on. There are sometimes brain puzzles that are helpful, or game apps or puzzles that kind of require you to focus on it. I like Sudoku puzzles because they're numbers and patterns, and that helps me get out of that cognitive part of my brain.
Okay, so we wanted to wrap up by sharing a few additional things that can serve as a framework for how to cope with imposter phenomenon. And Joe already referred to self-compassion a bit, but I do want to be a voice to say that there is no better time to be kind to ourselves than when we are experiencing a struggle. So a first step can be just noticing times when you might be thinking imposter type thoughts, when you might be being too hard on yourself. Perhaps you're feeling a sense of boredom, but getting frustrated that like, oh, I should be doing more work. Perhaps instead saying, well, it's normal to feel bored and that's tough to feel. I know that others feel this way too. as Joe mentioned, considering ways of talking to yourself is similar to a friend or similar to a loved one. Perhaps a friend shares with you that it's tough to get motivated to do schoolwork. My guess is that you probably would not say, "Oh, wow, you're being so lazy." We can oftentimes say this to ourselves, though. So imagining, what might you say to a friend in this case? Maybe something like, "Yeah, I get that. It's so hard to get going when there's not actually like a place to go with all this remote work. It's tough. Something I do is just kind of taking things day to day." I want to name that a part of self-compassion is also acknowledging that there may be a range of different feelings. Like there might be emotions that kind of go along with, feeling this imposter syndrome that you might not be able to shake quite easily. Perhaps there will be these, pop-up feelings of disappointment or sadness. Sometimes their emotions can be like a wave. When emotions are hard to shake, sometimes I like to describe them as like they kind of come up, you might notice them, they reach a peak, and then eventually they do come back down. And I think a part of self-compassion is nurturing whatever emotions do come up. Again, whether they're pleasant or neutral or more difficult, that a part of really being compassionate, maybe a part of it is giving yourself positive affirmations, and a part of it can be truly caring for yourself and validating your feelings as they are, that it's okay to struggle. Mindfulness. So mindfulness is being acutely aware of what you're sensing and feeling in the moment without interpretation or judgment. So mindfulness is not about stopping all imposter syndrome type thoughts. That would be a losing battle because oftentimes thoughts are automatic pop-ups. Mindfulness is about giving yourself the space to have these thoughts, not beat yourself up for having them, and just notice them as they are without becoming as caught up in them. An important piece to keep in mind is the way in which we're mindful of imposter syndrome. So to be mindful is to be an observer of your thoughts without judgment, almost as if you're looking at your thoughts as if you were a curious scientist examining something. For example, there's a difference between living from a thought and looking at a thought. Living from imposter syndrome is thinking, feeling, and truly believing that others know more than you, that you are incompetent, and so forth. Looking at imposter syndrome type thoughts is observing with curiosity what your mind is doing. Saying, this is that familiar imposter syndrome story that my mind loves to tell me about myself. Observing this thought without judgment and noticing when it passes, or noticing what you might do or think that keeps imposter syndrome along longer can be helpful. And I want to wrap up with a discussion about values. Another technique for living with imposter phenomenon is to be closely rooted in your own values. So asking, what type of fill in the blank do you want to be? Perhaps imagining that it's 20 years in the future and one of your colleagues, for example, is interviewed. How would you want them to describe you? What do you want to be remembered for? Sometimes connecting with these deeper, big picture questions and honing in on your values can help clear out the noise of negative self-talk and help keep your internal compass pointed in a direction that you want to go. So oftentimes when people consider this, how do you want to be remembered for, or how do you want others to describe you? They don't think, oh, I want to be described as someone who responded to all my emails within 5 minutes, but rather I would want to be described as someone whom my colleagues enjoyed working with, remembered as being there to help or support others, perhaps as being dependable or fun. I would say that it's easy to confuse goals with values. Goals are these concrete items that you do want to achieve. Values are a little bit different. Values aren't necessarily achievable, but these are desired life directions that you can embody now and on an ongoing basis. So I like to describe it as values as a compass and a direction that you're heading. Like, let's say you're heading east. You can't achieve east or say, yes, I am at east. I have made it there, right? It's a direction. It's a place that you care about where you want to kind of check in and make sure that you're going. Kind of going along these lines, like if you want to be remembered as being fun, you can't necessarily achieve funness. You can live by your values and just kind of, check in and be mindful of making sure that you're doing some actions that take you in that direction. Imposter syndrome, a reason why I bring this up is imposter syndrome is often fueled by too heavy of an emphasis on meeting goals that can become more and more unrealistic. What happens is then much of one's identity can become about whether or not I've achieved these goals, whether or not I've made it to these checkpoints. And that can result in feeling incompetent, especially if a lot of these goals are quite perfectionistic. So what can happen is that placing a higher emphasis on living life according to values can help to relieve imposter phenomenon because it places more self-worth on whether you're engaging in activities that are ultimately meaningful for you. You can certainly still set goals, but to have them be realistic and have them align with things that you actually care about. We can all take satisfaction in meeting certain checkpoints, but there's much more to overall happiness than based on whether these external checkpoints are met. So some takeaway thoughts from our presentation. Imposter phenomena is natural and everyone has it at some point. You are not alone. Everyone feels like an imposter sometimes, and that's okay. Realize that you don't get over it, that you act in spite of it. So again, some of these thoughts might be automatic pop-ups, but what matters more than trying to prevent these pop-ups is that you act through them. Emotions and thoughts are not facts. So as Joe was talking about, that just because we have a thought of something doesn't mean that it's true. Just because we have a thought of being lazy doesn't mean that it's automatically true. And our emotions don't define us. Emotions are, again, like waves that can come over us that we experience and have, but that don't define us. You don't need to be perfect to succeed, but you do need to take action. And intentional self-care, sleep, healthy eating, exercise is of course foundational to navigating stress. And lastly, here's some actual advice that was put into a cool word cloud. Advice from female graduate students in response to this question: what advice would you give someone trying to overcome feeling like an imposter? And you can see many on here, like, do not be too hard on yourself. That self-compassion that we talked about. You deserve to be there. Everybody has their own journey, but there's no right or wrong journey to have. Do not be afraid to ask questions, that it's okay not to pretend like things are okay, but to be more honest. And my guess is that many more people are feeling the way that you feel, but you don't know until you ask. Take a deep breath. I appreciated that Joe led us through that earlier. It's truly okay to make mistakes. Giving yourself that permission to make mistakes. That you can still be successful, and you can still live a valued life by making mistakes, even if it is uncomfortable. Keeping a list of accomplishments. Stop comparing yourself to others. I won't go through all of these, but these all have similar themes that we talked about today. Interested in more? Oh,
That's fine. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
So I'm big into TED Talks. So these are examples of different things. If you'd like to learn some more, these kind of cover the themes that we covered in today's program. So there's next steps if you're like to do that. And these are some, if you're looking for additional support, I encourage you to take a look at mental health services. And these are all available on our website and some examples of things that we can provide. Are we back to you, Simone?
I think so. If anyone has any questions that they would like to ask our presenters, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask the questions. Just give that just a second. Also, thank you, Stephanie and Joe, for sharing all this about imposter phenomenon. It's so prevalent for so many people. I've actually had a lot of conversations about it, strangely, this week. So I'm really glad we were able to talk about it today. And I really hope that everyone here was a little less alone when those thoughts come up after attending today's session. Now, what has happened every time is I start to close us and then questions come in. I'm gonna do it again and we're gonna see if that's how it plays out this time as well. So again, thank you to everyone for attending. We've been so grateful to share space with you both yesterday and today, and we really hope that you found it useful as you plan ways to take care of yourself. Beyond the summit, I invite you to put your mental health plan into practice next week as part of a grassroots campaign to promote self-care and community well-being among all of our students, faculty, and staff. We're calling this collective effort Take Care UW. You can find related activities and recorded sessions from the Mental Health and Wellbeing Summit on our event website, wellbeingsummit.wisc.edu, and join the conversation on social media using the hashtag TakeCareUW. So not seeing any questions in the chat, I'm going to then just wrap us up and say thank you all, and I hope you have a great weekend.